When we imagine global conflict, images of heavily armored tanks crossing borders and fighter jets scrambling into the sky usually dominate the headlines. But right now, a completely different type of battle is tearing apart the international system, and no shots are being fired. Instead of deploying soldiers to foreign soil, major powers are weaponizing trade policies, manipulating supply chains, and freezing sovereign financial assets. This invisible warfare bypasses traditional defenses entirely, causing severe economic damage that rivals physical combat. If a superpower wants to cripple a rival state today, they no longer need to bomb their industrial centers or blockade their massive coastal ports. They simply cut off their access to critical semiconductor chips, plunging their technological development into the dark ages. We are witnessing the most aggressive restructuring of global alliances since the Cold War, driven entirely by economic leverage rather than military might. Nations are being forced to choose sides in a quiet struggle that dictates who controls the future of human progress. This covert competition determines whether families can afford basic groceries, whether factories keep running, and whether entire currencies collapse overnight. You might not see the troops marching down your street, but your daily life is already heavily impacted by the crossfire. Welcome to Global Power Brief, where we analyze the hidden geopolitical forces shaping our constantly shifting world. Today, we are exposing the mechanics of this silent economic war, revealing how nations are quietly dismantling each other without ever declaring open hostilities. For decades following the end of the Cold War, the prevailing assumption was that globalized free trade would guarantee lasting peace among rival nations. Politicians believed that if countries depended on each other for vital goods, they would never risk destroying those networks. This interconnected system worked exceptionally well when everyone played by the same established rules, creating unprecedented wealth across multiple continents. However, this shared prosperity masked a dangerous vulnerability that ambitious leaders were quietly plotting to exploit. The turning point arrived when dominant nations realized that the very infrastructure of global trade could be transformed into a devastating strategic weapon. The financial pipelines meant to deliver mutual prosperity were suddenly converted into deliberate choke points of control. By dominating the critical nodes of global commerce, a single government could theoretically freeze another country out of the entire international system. They could block financial transactions, deny access to vital raw materials, and completely isolate their target from the world. Western nations initially pioneered this modern approach, utilizing their overwhelming control over the global banking system to punish rogue states. They imposed crippling financial sanctions that locked non-compliant governments out of essential foreign exchange markets immediately. But as these economic weapons were deployed more frequently against larger adversaries, the targeted nations realized they needed to build their own defenses. They began quietly constructing alternative financial systems, trading directly in local currencies to bypass Western banks. This strategic pivot shattered the illusion of a unified global economy, dividing the world into competing blocs that distrusted each other profoundly. Governments began hoarding gold reserves and securing exclusive resource contracts to insulate themselves from future economic shocks. Suddenly, the complex supply chains that previously connected factories in Asia to eager consumers in North America were viewed as unacceptable security risks. Leaders scrambled to bring manufacturing back within their own borders, prioritizing national security over simple cost efficiency. This drastic shift from economic cooperation to fierce economic nationalism laid the essential groundwork for the invisible conflict we are experiencing now. The era of unchecked globalization effectively died, replaced by a ruthless era of strategic decoupling and systemic vulnerability. The most visible battleground in this new era of warfare centers entirely around the development and distribution of advanced semiconductor technology. These microscopic chips are the foundational brains powering everything from our smartphones to advanced military missile guidance systems. Recognizing the critical importance of these components, the United States launched an aggressive campaign to deny rival nations access to cutting-edge chips. By restricting the export of vital manufacturing equipment, Washington effectively choked off foreign technological advancement. This was not a simple trade dispute over tariffs, but rather a calculated strike designed to cripple an adversary's artificial intelligence capabilities permanently. Without those advanced chips, a nation cannot effectively modernize its military forces or compete in the future economy. In direct retaliation, targeted nations have weaponized their own unique geographic advantages, specifically their control over crucial critical minerals. They restricted the export of rare earth elements, which are absolutely essential for manufacturing electric vehicles and wind turbines. This retaliatory strike created massive panic across Western industrial sectors, threatening to derail their highly publicized transitions to green energy. It proved that even nations lagging in software development could inflict catastrophic economic pain by withholding raw materials. Beyond the technology sector, the battle for dominance is raging violently within the traditionally stable architecture of global energy markets. Oil and natural gas are no longer just commodities bought and sold, but powerful tools of political coercion and strategic intimidation. When a major energy producer decides to drastically slash its output, it is rarely just a simple market adjustment meant to stabilize dropping prices. It is often a deliberate geopolitical maneuver designed to trigger painful inflation and destabilize the governments of consuming nations. We see this dynamic playing out as alliances between top oil producers tighten, intentionally squeezing Western economies that remain dependent on cheap fuel. Higher energy costs inevitably force factories to shut down, throwing thousands of workers into sudden and unexpected unemployment. The financial sector represents the third major front in this hidden conflict, where currency itself is deployed as a weapon of mass economic destruction. The dominance of the US dollar allows Washington to track and block almost any international transaction moving across the globe. By simply adding a foreign corporation or a sovereign central bank to a restricted list, authorities can instantly evaporate billions of dollars in value. This immense power has deeply terrified rising economies, prompting them to aggressively accelerate their push for de-dollarization. These emerging powers are establishing alternative payment networks, allowing them to conduct massive bilateral trade without ever touching the American dollar. If successful, this shift would critically weaken the economic leverage that Western governments have relied upon for many decades. Furthermore, nations are aggressively purchasing immense quantities of physical gold to anchor their financial systems outside of established Western jurisdiction. This systematic accumulation provides a reliable safety net, ensuring their economies survive, even if completely isolated from global banks. Meanwhile, a quiet but equally destructive battle is happening through the widespread use of state-sponsored corporate espionage and persistent cyber warfare. Elite hacking groups routinely infiltrate rival networks, stealing decades of valuable research data in mere minutes. This rampant intellectual property theft allows competing nations to completely leapfrog the incredibly expensive and tedious process of technological innovation. They simply replicate stolen designs, undercutting the original creators in the global market and destroying their profit margins entirely. Unlike conventional military attacks that provoke immediate international outrage, these digital intrusions offer complete plausible deniability to the attackers. Governments can relentlessly sabotage their rivals' infrastructure while publicly claiming absolute ignorance regarding the incidents. Another critical component of this invisible war involves the strategic acquisition of vital civilian infrastructure within vulnerable developing nations worldwide. Wealthy governments provide massive loans to poorer countries to build essential deepwater ports, expansive railways, and power grids. While these projects are aggressively marketed as mutual development aid, they frequently trap the recipient nations in unavoidable and crushing debt cycles. When the borrowing country inevitably defaults, the creditor nation legally seizes control of those vital strategic infrastructure assets. Controlling a foreign commercial port might seem entirely benign during peacetime, but it provides a massive logistical advantage during a geopolitical crisis. These seemingly commercial facilities can be rapidly converted to support naval operations, extending a nation's military reach globally. Food security has also been fully weaponized in this modern era, with dominant agricultural producers restricting grain exports to punish political adversaries. By artificially engineering massive food shortages, hostile governments can quickly incite domestic riots and topple fragile regimes abroad. The targeted countries are forced to comply with painful political demands simply to secure enough basic sustenance to prevent mass starvation among citizens. This incredibly ruthless tactic demonstrates how deeply interconnected global supply chains have become glaring vulnerabilities for the weak. Even the seemingly neutral realm of global telecommunications has transformed into a fiercely contested battleground over fundamental national security concerns. The deployment of advanced mobile networks is no longer viewed as standard infrastructure development, but as a critical intelligence risk. Western governments have systematically banned specific foreign hardware from their networks, fearing these systems possess hidden backdoors for espionage. They argue that allowing a rival nation to build your communication grids is essentially handing them the keys to your entire digital life. This technological blockade has forced developing countries into a highly uncomfortable position, requiring them to choose sides in a bitter digital divide. They must weigh the immediate benefits of cheaper imported technology against the long-term geopolitical anger of powerful Western allies. The cumulative effect of these overlapping economic battlefronts is the rapid dissolution of the previously stable, rules-based international trading order. Institutions originally designed to resolve disputes peacefully are now completely paralyzed, unable to enforce rules upon powerful superpowers. With international law practically sidelined, nations are reverting to a primal system where sheer economic leverage dictates the terms of global survival. It is a modern Darwinian struggle, where the countries that control the physical resources and digital networks hold absolute and total power. Those incapable of navigating this complex battlefield are being rapidly stripped of their sovereignty, heavily pressured into submitting to stronger neighbors. They become mere pawns in a much grander game, sacrificing their independent foreign policies just to secure their basic economic survival. The most dangerous aspect of this undeclared warfare is that it possesses absolutely no clear boundaries, escalating quietly without any public awareness. Because there are no violent explosions or formal declarations of hostility, the general public remains largely oblivious to the growing threat. As this silent conflict intensifies globally, the immediate consequences are rippling aggressively through the daily lives of ordinary citizens everywhere. The aggressive fracturing of global trade routes directly translates into permanently higher prices for almost every single consumer product. When manufacturers are forced to abandon cheap foreign labor to rebuild factories domestically, the immense cost of that transition is passed down to you. Persistent inflation is no longer a temporary post-crisis anomaly, but a permanent structural feature of a newly divided global economy. Furthermore, this relentless economic warfare is systematically destroying the cooperative frameworks required to tackle shared global challenges effectively. Nations are fiercely hoarding medical supplies and protective technologies, prioritizing their own citizens over unified international efforts. The resulting technological fragmentation ensures that scientific progress will inevitably slow down, as brilliant researchers are blocked from collaborating. Instead of pooling resources to cure diseases or develop clean energy, rival governments are building separate, duplicative innovation ecosystems. This deep systemic division is also increasing the likelihood of regional military conflicts erupting in highly volatile and heavily contested border zones. When nations no longer share strong economic ties, the massive financial deterrents that previously prevented armed combat completely disappear. If a country is already suffering under maximum economic sanctions, they logically have very little to lose by launching a conventional military offensive. The invisible war ironically makes physical war far more probable, pushing desperate governments into violently reckless strategic decisions. We are already seeing this tragic dynamic unfold in Eastern Europe and the Middle East, where economic pressure failed to deter kinetic military actions. In fact, the harsh financial penalties imposed beforehand often harden the resolve of aggressive regimes, convincing them they must fight to survive. Consequently, defense budgets worldwide are skyrocketing to unprecedented levels, draining massive amounts of capital away from vital social programs globally. Governments are drastically cutting healthcare and education funding to frantically stockpile advanced munitions and defensive missile systems. This massive reallocation of societal wealth threatens to drastically lower the standard of living for working-class populations across both rival hemispheres. Citizens are being quietly asked to sacrifice their personal prosperity to fund an invisible geopolitical struggle they barely even comprehend. For multinational corporations, this shifting landscape represents an absolute nightmare of compliance, forcing them to navigate endless webs of sanctions. Companies must hire massive teams of lawyers just to ensure they are not accidentally violating complex export controls and facing massive fines. Many major businesses are choosing to split their operations entirely, creating separate entities to serve Western and restricted Eastern markets. This highly inefficient duplication destroys economies of scale, further guaranteeing that the era of cheap consumer goods is permanently over. The profound weaponization of global finance also severely threatens the long-term stability and dominance of the United States dollar as the reserve currency. As more nations aggressively bypass the traditional banking system, the sheer demand for American Treasury bonds will inevitably begin to plummet. If the dollar dramatically loses its supreme status, the United States will face crippling borrowing costs, triggering a massive domestic financial crisis. Washington would suddenly be unable to easily finance its enormous national debt, forcing catastrophic cuts to essential government services. Meanwhile, countries dominating the production of future-facing resources like lithium and cobalt are discovering massive new geopolitical leverage. These previously overlooked nations are demanding highly favorable trade terms, fundamentally redrawing the traditional map of global power. This sudden shift leaves resource-poor nations heavily vulnerable, forcing them into highly unfavorable economic partnerships just to keep their lights on. The gap between the technologically dominant resource controllers and the dependent states is widening rapidly, creating profound global inequality. In this incredibly ruthless environment, absolute neutrality is quickly becoming a completely impossible luxury for the world's smaller developing nations. Superpowers are aggressively demanding unwavering loyalty, explicitly threatening to withhold vital trade access if these smaller countries refuse to comply. Consequently, we are witnessing the rigid formation of completely exclusive economic blocs, highly reminiscent of the tightly sealed spheres of the Cold War. However, this modern divide is infinitely more dangerous because the global economy was previously intertwined to an incredibly complex degree. Disentangling these incredibly complex supply chains is a brutally painful process, causing severe disruptions that easily cascade across multiple industries. A single blocked shipment of critical components can instantly shut down automobile factories on the opposite side of the planet. Ultimately, this hidden economic war represents a fundamental rejection of the optimistic belief that shared commerce inevitably leads to universal harmony. We have entered a deeply cynical age where interdependence is heavily weaponized, and mutual trust has been entirely replaced by paranoid security protocols. The casualties of this conflict will not be counted in fallen soldiers, but in shuttered factories, collapsed currencies, and impoverished local communities. The devastation is completely silent, yet it leaves lasting scars on the global economic landscape that will take many generations to adequately heal. The architecture of the future world is being aggressively forged right now, shaped by targeted tariffs, strategic tech bans, and ruthless financial embargoes. Those who fail to understand the mechanics of this invisible warfare will inevitably find themselves crushed under the weight of its massive consequences. The global order that defined the last 3 decades is completely dead, completely shattered by the relentless pressure of this modern economic warfare. We are standing at the terrifying precipice of a permanently divided world, where commerce is entirely indistinguishable from conventional combat. Understanding this shifting reality is absolutely essential, because this hidden conflict will directly dictate the future prosperity of your exact community. The invisible hands manipulating global supply chains and currency valuations ultimately determine the absolute security of your own financial future. There is no realistic path back to the highly cooperative and seamlessly integrated global economy that politicians so fondly remember and loudly champion. The competing superpowers have already crossed the final point of no return, fully committing to a prolonged strategy of systematic mutual destruction. As this silent war accelerates, the most resilient nations will be those that fiercely secure their resources and rapidly adapt to isolated market dynamics. The vulnerable states trapped in the middle must navigate this treacherous landscape carefully, or risk being completely economically annihilated forever. We will continue to track these crucial economic battlefronts closely, providing you with the necessary context to navigate this increasingly volatile era. True geopolitical power is rarely announced with grand military parades. It is violently seized in the quiet, hidden corridors of global finance. If you want to stay ahead of these massive global shifts and understand the hidden forces reshaping our reality, you must actively follow the actual data. Hit subscribe to join Global Power Brief and ensure you never miss our deep analysis of conflicts happening beneath the surface. The invisible war is already raging around us, fundamentally altering the trajectory of human history without ever firing a single traditional weapon. Stay informed, stay deeply vigilant, and we will see you in the next briefing as we uncover the stark truths of international power.